Hello, my name is Kevin Eack, and I'm your presenter for the topic of emergency planning for places of worship. This is a pilot project sponsored by the Central Southern Illinois Synod. While I've had extensive education, training, and experience in the field of law enforcement and emergency planning, only recently did I answer what I believe to be a call to serve in ministry. After accepting a call, I will be ordained as a minister of word and service. So, while I think I do bring some valuable insight into the topic of emergency planning and preparedness, I wanted to also let you know that I bring an awareness of public ministry to this presentation. I want to preface this presentation with a caveat. This presentation by itself will not provide you an emergency plan. That cannot be achieved by me or anyone else in a brief presentation. What I can do, and I plan to do, is provide you a framework, as well as some points or issues for you to consider in improving your safety and security posture at your church or your church school. I'll also provide you some free resources that can help you tremendously. This isn't rocket science, but it can get complicated or even somewhat overwhelming. I hope in this presentation that I can break it down for you in pieces so that you and your safety team can achieve your objectives step by step. As you can see, I've been fortunate to have had many opportunities to further my education, training, and experience throughout my law enforcement and security career. Post 9/11, my duties included standing up a 24/7 intelligence center in Illinois called STIC at State Police that still operates today, seeking to identify potential threats, both foreign and domestic, that exist in our state. In my final years in law enforcement, I was fortunate to have been chosen as an FBI Fellow, serving under FBI Director Robert Mueller at the National Counterterrorism Center in Virginia, with a focus upon school and campus safety, before retiring from law enforcement to the private sector, where I've done a variety of security work. Well, I don't need to tell you that it's a jungle out there, but just how big is this problem? Nearly 47,000 people were killed in gun violence in the U.S. in 2024, and as of the end of March, roughly 47 mass shootings just this year. 47 children killed, 71 injured, 2,564 gun deaths, 4,200 gun injuries. I suppose you may only have to watch the 6 o'clock news to appreciate that armed violence in this country has become a serious issue. In my consulting business, I have worked across Illinois and in several other states, assessing public and private sector institutions and providing recommendations on how to help improve their security posture. This image shows the person who was involved in the Lakewood church shooting that occurred in Houston in February of 2024. This shooting was just one of over 60 examples since 2015 involving armed violence in places of worship. Statistics suggest religious bias and violence associated with it are trending upward. According to recent analysis, Sunday mornings are now considered one of the high-risk periods for potential mass casualties. On Sunday, February 11th, Janice Marino entered the church with an AR-15 rifle and her 7-year-old son and engaged in a firefight with off-duty police officers during a worship service. Further investigation disclosed she had a history of mental health issues along with a history of anti-Semitic writings. I think it's most helpful for you to think about 4 pillars of emergency preparedness. This helps us better understand the topic and how you might tackle this issue at your church or school. It may be helpful to break it down into 4 important parts. Only then can you focus your attention and your resources effectively. And it should come as no surprise to you that if we do the first 2 well, there is no need for the other 2. But while we all hope for the best, we really must plan for the worst. These elements are prevention, detection, response, and recovery. Each of these parts in emergency preparedness have their own unique characteristics and will require different resources. Also, please note that the resources needed for the first two elements is far less than those needed for the final two. The goal is always to resolve the issue through prevention and detection before any harm comes to others. So what are the threats? What are the types of threats we're concerned with? Well, threats really fall into primarily two categories. Human threats originate from human activity or sometimes human error. Some of your churches or schools may be located near freight rail, in which case a train crash or a derailment can pose an immediate threat to the area due to fire or the possibility of hazardous material or hazmat release. The same can be said of major highways where commercial truck traffic can have the same result. But I'm guessing that these days most people's minds immediately go to an active shooter, or what I'll refer to as armed assailant, since a person using other weapons can be just as deadly. Statistically, we have a greater likelihood of being impacted by weather than other threats. In central and southern Illinois, the threat of extreme weather, including tornadoes, is significant. Floods are also a concern near major waterways, and parts of Illinois are considered vulnerable to earthquake, although to date that has not risen to be a major issue. I think most would agree that medical emergencies are the most likely threat, particularly among the elderly. In daycare, Sunday school, church activities, or Lutheran school settings, the potential of child injury must be considered. As we talk further in this presentation, you'll see that medical emergencies are a primary focus in preparedness. So, where do we put our resources? And do we focus on all threats? And if so, how? An approach I like to take is to ask the leaders of an organization, what is your appetite for risk? That may seem like a very strange question to ask since we don't want any risk. But the truth is, no measures can eliminate risk 100% unless we want to shut down all activities. So within your own leadership, it's a legitimate question to pose and discuss. What risks do we find acceptable in light of our mission? As this slide explains, there are those risks that are high probability but low impact. A minor injury on a playground is a good example. Are we prepared to shut down the playground to avoid this risk? I don't think so. Then there are low probability but high impact events. This might include a person having a heart attack or a seizure during worship service, or yes, an armed assailant in the church or school. Using this approach in analyzing risk can be helpful in deciding where to place your resources in terms of time, talents, and funds. I'm afraid I can't answer this question for you. There's no magic formula. You and your leadership at the church or school must decide what areas of risk are acceptable and where it's felt most resources are needed. But I'll be providing you more ideas as we go along. First, we'll talk about prevention. What's the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? After 9/11, Congress immediately poured tax dollars into a number of initiatives. But what was the one thing we noticed nationwide very quickly? The answer? Increased airport security. Churches would be wise to focus their resources on prevention as well, as that's where your efforts will have the greatest impact. The first step, though, is to do a risk and vulnerability assessment. But where to start? Well, the place to start is to do a full assessment of your particular facility. It's just as easy as it sounds. You are assessing your daily operations both day and night to see how your building is used. For this, you really must think like a black hat or a bad guy versus thinking like a pastor. How might a person exploit your building's configuration, lighting, access controls, and so on to commit a crime like theft or to take a child from daycare or otherwise harm others? What simple, low-cost measures could be implemented to reduce the risk of that happening? What hazards are present, like a broken stone step to the entrance, or a light over the exterior door that is no longer functioning. When a group is using the facility at night for meetings, is the lighting sufficient both at entrances as well as in the parking lot? If you host meetings of outside organizations, do you assume they know how to call 911 on a church phone? Is there a 9 or other key needed to access an outside line? Do guests know where the fire exits are? If you have AEDs or first aid supplies available, do people, especially ushers, know how to use them until help arrives? These are the low-hanging fruit that can be easily addressed with little expense in many cases. In the risk and vulnerability assessment process, you want to first look at your entry points. How is that lighting at those points at night? Do you have emergency signage in the building? Where is your fire suppression or first aid or AED units? Are they well marked? Where are your areas of safety located? Is there signage to indicate that since when people are under extreme stress, even someone familiar with the building's layout can get disoriented? Where will you direct people, including during worship time, if there's extreme weather? Do you have what you would consider to be a safe room that can be locked in case of an armed intruder? Do the ushers, staff, and volunteers all know what they need to know to make everyone safe? It's important for you to know that regardless of how well you prepare, communications will be the first thing to break down in an emergency. Research has proven that over and over, how will you communicate within your church or school during an emergency? At St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Washington, Illinois, where I once was a member, extreme weather is something everyone is keenly aware of. That's because on November 17, 2013, the date that people in Washington will not soon forget, an EF4 tornado swept through part of the town during church services. Because warning systems were working properly, there were few casualties. But is someone monitoring outdoor conditions during your worship service? How will any threats be communicated when worship is already underway? An important term that'll help us in looking at this situation is the term situational awareness. I like to say, and it's shown in this image, that you want eyes out and eyes in. Cameras can also be very useful and provide awareness at entrances that are needed. You want to be aware of external events that may be arising that could impact the safety of those people inside. A great example of this was the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It was the site of a tragic incident on June 10, 2009, when an 88-year-old white supremacist entered the building with a rifle, killing a security guard and exchanging gunfire with 2 other guards before he was killed. Today, there are rings of security around that museum inside and out, and they can now identify threats at least a block away. As I mentioned, communications is key. And in the course of changes within our communication system, a number of businesses as well as churches and schools have reduced or eliminated the use of landlines due to cost. However, in doing so, that may mean the Public Safety Answering Point, or PSAP, also known as your 911 dispatch center, won't immediately know where you're calling from. Some of this depends on what part of Illinois you're located in, and you should check with your local PSAP or law enforcement agency to find out. I've been to churches and church schools that all converted to IP phone systems as a cost-saving measure. But because the main server is at the church, when someone at the school dials 911, the dispatcher believes the call is really coming from the church, not the school, which is over a mile away. Do you know what happens at your church, and have you tested it? You can't assume the dispatcher knows where you're calling from. Since time is of the essence, everyone should be trained to open the call with the name and their location. For example, this is Julie at Zion Lutheran School at 1600 Woodlawn Road in Lincoln, Illinois. I'm calling because we have a student who's having difficulty breathing. We need an ambulance. This will not come naturally to most people in a real event, since often the caller is under stress and will want to blurt out the problem only to learn that the dispatcher is still desperately trying to figure out where they are. This is even more the case with cell phones. In many parts of Illinois, we take several minutes for the dispatcher to determine where the caller is, and then it may only pinpoint a general area. That's why you must open your phone call with the exact location you're calling from. Also, many don't realize that in a critical incident, when everyone dials 911 on a cell phone, the tower quickly becomes overloaded and does not permit calls to go through. So, plan on communications to be the first thing to fail. Intercom systems or other phone systems that allow announcements over the speakers in an emergency can be very helpful. This is also why most colleges and schools use emergency text messaging, since those are more likely to function when towers are overloaded. Now let's talk about building access controls. Probably one of the most common problems at churches is controls of the access to the building. Only you can decide what you're comfortable with. Unlike businesses, churches are often active places day and night, as you want to encourage the building's use. However, it's best if you know who has access so you can regulate it. If someone no longer needs the key or access card, get it back from them. As assignments and roles change, update your access controls on at least an annual basis. If you are fortunate to have moved to keycard access, this is ideal, since with a stroke of a key, someone's access can be restricted to certain hours or discontinued. If you have a child care, daycare, or school as part of your campus, this is crucial. When's the last time you changed the locks on your church? Lighting. Lighting is not simple. I've been through and around buildings with plenty of lighting that, due to its design, is still inadequate. Worse, I've been to some where light can actually blind you from seeing hazards or people nearby. If you have an electrician in your congregation with training and experience in lighting, leverage them if you think you may have an issue. With LED lighting today, they use less electricity and can often be much more effective at reducing areas of risk. Some churches now use motion sensing lighting throughout the interior of the church. This can be very helpful in a few ways. First, it can save electricity costs when a room is not in use. Secondly, it can eliminate the need for someone going down a dark hallway from having to search for a switch. Finally, if there is an intruder in the building, a light activating in what should have been an unused area of the building can be a clue of their location. However, these should not be used in areas of safety or safe rooms, since they would indicate to the intruder where you are. Something to consider is insider threat. Have you conducted background checks on those in positions of trust with access to church funds or who work with the elderly or children? Do you know if you have a registered sex offender in your congregation or as a volunteer? Some insurance carriers provide free training on this subject and discounts for background checks. Has your church council passed a motion setting forth the expectations for background checks and their frequency? Have you verified that those who are driving members on authorized church outings, retreats, or trips has a valid driver's license? Probably one of the most important things you can do is form a liaison with first responders in your area. I like to say if you have coffee and donuts, they will come, and it's true. Your local police, fire, and EMT teams are crucial to your success. Include them in your planning process, and before finalizing your plan, invite them to meet with you to go over it. You may be surprised. They'll often have valuable insight, suggestions, or ideas on how to improve it. One of the key recommendations I always make is to have a digital diagram of your building on file with the police and fire departments now. With mobile data terminals now in use in most police and fire vehicles, they can be gathering information while en route and pull up your diagram to determine how best to approach the building or incident safely and effectively. Often, valuable time is wasted explaining the layout of a building under stress at the scene. While people are calm, provide them the information they need, including any phone numbers, extension numbers for meeting rooms or spaces throughout the building, just in case they need to communicate with people in that area, including the armed assailant or victims. Next, we talk about emergency operations plans. I can't stress enough that exercise your emergency plan at least annually. This can be as simple as coffee and donuts with your first responders and your team at a conference table. That's called a tabletop exercise. They're a very valuable tool in flushing out any concerns or deficiencies. Functional exercises allow you to take a step further and walk and talk through exactly what you would do in a certain scenario. A full-scale exercise involves police and fire responding in a mock disaster situation with full-on response and can be much more time-intensive to put together. But the saddest situation is when organizations create an EOP and then they throw it in a drawer or store it on a computer and they never look at it again. Chaos is sure to follow. We're now going to take a few minutes to discuss the materials we just covered. Here are some questions to hopefully prompt some of your discussion among your group. What did we learn from this block? What were some of your takeaways? Thinking of your own church from the balcony, so to speak, or to put it differently, from a 30,000-foot level, how well prepared are you in the area of prevention? Ask yourself, with the resources we presently have, what measures might we deploy in light of this new information? We now move into the other pillar, which is detection. If you'll forgive a bit of police dark humor, the saying is, "In God we trust, all others we monitor." It has some merit when speaking of church safety. Churches really can no longer assume everyone who enters a place of worship or church school has good intentions. Maintaining situational awareness is key. This term, often used by those in military or law enforcement, refers to being aware of any activity, including threats, that may be within or outside of your location. This doesn't have to be costly or elaborate. Train your ushers or staff and always have someone assigned to be looking outward and also others to be watching inward. In a school setting, there should always be someone responsible for watching for suspicious activity outside the school, while others should be responsible for what's taking place inside. Have a code to use and a way to convey it in the event a threat is identified. If your facility allows for a safe room or a locked area in which to secure people, have a plan and train for that plan. Have someone designated to handle and direct first responders when they arrive. Security cameras can be a very useful tool. It's not uncommon now for churches and church schools to use cameras for safety. The cost of wireless cameras has gone down considerably, and their quality has greatly improved. Before launching into this, however, you should ask yourself what their purpose is. Are they for protection and detection, or for capturing events on camera for historic or evidentiary purposes after the event? The worst thing you can do is install cameras for prevention and detection purposes and then not monitor them. You then created a greater liability, since you apparently identified a problem or issue by installing the cameras, yet you did not invest the time or resources to monitor them. The decisions around cameras needs to be thought through very carefully. Used properly, they can be a huge asset in protecting people and property. Be careful not to monitor areas of privacy or confidentiality, such as restrooms or areas where the pastor provides counseling. And consult your IT person about the impact of installing cameras on servers and equipment. We now talk about the cyber threat. As everyone knows, the cyber threat is alive and well. While you may not view churches as an attractive target, on more than one occasion I've consulted with churches that through an email compromise, one or more members' banking information was stolen. In one case, the pastor's paycheck was stolen by fraudsters who compromised the church's email. Fraudsters will also send emails or texts out to the congregation from the pastor's compromised email requesting the purchase of gift cards or other common scams. Vigilance is important as this problem is not going away anytime soon. This is now an opportunity for discussion. We've covered a lot in this section. We'll now take a few minutes to discuss what you've gleaned from this section on detection. What did you learn from this block? What were some of the takeaways? Thinking of your own church, how well prepared are you in the area of detection? Ask yourself, with the resources you presently have, what measures might you deploy to gain more situational awareness? Would this be done with increased training, staffing, or technology? What might be some of the obstacles to taking such measures? Consider the cost-benefit analysis for each measure. The third pillar of emergency planning is response. While prevention and detection are critical, there will be times when, despite our best efforts, those two measures aren't enough. One should always hope for the best, but plan for the worst. I like to say that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Let's talk now about the concept of having an armed presence at your church or school. This can be a very delicate issue. I want to emphasize there is no right or wrong answer to this question. It depends upon the risk appetite of your congregation and its leadership. As you know, Illinois is one of the most restrictive states in the country regarding firearm possession. It's complicated, and there are legal issues to be considered. If you feel the need to explore this question, for starters, I would consult your insurance carrier. In many cases, your present policy may not cover willful use of deadly force against an intruder. Even if an armed intruder is subdued through the use of force, or even deadly force, his family may sue the actors and church for injuries. The costs of defending a wrongful death suit can be high. Also, how will you ensure responding police are aware of your own members that are using a firearm so that there's no confusion at the scene? I've noticed in my career that there are many who are all too eager to, quote, permit carry to church. But have they ever considered the liability if they discharged a weapon in a crowded sanctuary? Does the individual have their own liability policy to cover this? There are many questions around this, and I would urge slow, careful thought around this issue and consult your legal counsel. And do not be under the illusion that by permitting members to carry a firearm onto your premises, you won't be held liable. A plaintiff will sue everyone. So next, let's talk about building your emergency operation plan. Following a risk and vulnerability assessment and report, and writing the emergency operations plan for your organization. Keep things simple. The best approach is to break down each type of threat and list the expected procedures for each. Make it simple, then train to that process, and most important, exercise to it. If communications is the first thing to break down in an emergency, the second is that the players do not know their specific role or responsibility in your plan. This often leads to chaos, and when there's danger of loss of life, an effective response is crucial. All too often, I've seen confusion and chaos with big and small organizations, and it's painful to see. With just a little planning, discussion, and exercising the plan, you can be ready. Most important, never name specific people in your EOP, only positions, pastor, staff, ushers, since naming individuals who, over time, may have moved or may no longer be active as members creates a gap in your plan when you need it most. Identify most probable events and procedures to follow for each type of event: fire, medical emergency, hazardous weather, missing child, and then identify the roles and responsibilities for each person: the pastors, staff, ushers, teachers, and then designate backups for each. Include a safe rally point for building occupants nearby with protection from weather. Finally, remember that Murphy's Law is alive and well, so be prepared to adjust your plan as needed. So, some further details of your EOP. If a lockdown becomes necessary, pre-identify areas of safety and rescue, including for those who are disabled. If a daycare or vacation Bible school is involved, include a safe place nearby for reunification so that parents and guardians can pick up their children in a safe and orderly manner. Prepare in draft form and then engage the first responders to make sure that your plan aligns with their plan. When children are involved, be prepared for parents to immediately disregard all process and procedures. In part, who can blame them? We all feel that way as parents and grandparents. However, there are those who exploit chaos, particularly when it comes to children. Everyone must be accounted for, as you are in loco parentis when the children are at church or school without their parents. This means you are legally responsible for their safety and welfare. Do not release children to anyone claiming to have been sent by the parent. Make sure you have a place for reunification pre-arranged in your EOP, someone in charge, and do it in an orderly, methodical manner, unless there are medical reasons to release them more quickly to authorized medical personnel. Also, be prepared for the event to go viral on social media and inundate your main phone line, which may be sorely needed at the time to manage the emergency. Finally, go over your draft EOP with first responders to make sure it aligns with their response protocols. Once they arrive, they will be in charge, not you, under the Incident Command System and the National Incident Management System. So, responses in your EOP. Your EOP should be like a cookbook in a way, outlining not just procedures, but also the resources. If the windows are blown out due to a storm, do you have a prearranged contractor listed who, in an emergency, can come secure the window or damaged door? Rest assured, everyone else will be calling that same person, so don't assume you'll have priority if you wait until the last minute or for the disaster to hit. If there's been a traumatic incident occur, do you have a resource you can list who's agreed to come provide grief counseling beyond what you as a pastor are comfortable in providing? What about flooding due to weather or a broken pipe? Do you have a service contract, which is often free, prearranged and listed in your EOP to call for water damage mitigation? If your youth group is out of town at a retreat and a critical incident occurs, is there a section on this scenario in your EOP? And does your youth leader have a copy of the EOP on their phone that they can consult in case a resource is needed? If we fail to plan, we plan to fail. Now let's take a few minutes to discuss what we covered in this block of instruction. Some very important information was provided. What did you learn from this block? What were some of your takeaways? Thinking of your own church or school, how well prepared are you in this area of response? Ask yourself, with the resources you presently have, what measures might you deploy to improve your plan and preparedness? Have you made sure your proposed plan aligns with the protocols of first responders who will use those plans at the scene? Remember, confusion and chaos can take up valuable time needed to save lives. Our next pillar is recovery. Once a critical incident is over, often the work has just begun. What needs to be done to mitigate the impact of the event on your place of worship or church school? What is your communication strategy? Will you need an alternate location for a period of time? How will you resume operations while also helping people cope and process with what occurred. Recovery also includes having a backup plan for worship services in another location, should your site become unavailable due to damage or becoming a crime scene. If you host a daycare, what's your plan other than simply closing? Is there another church or daycare willing to be your backup? Many times, nearby churches and daycares will collaborate on such things for their continuity of operations plan, or CONOPS, in advance of an incident. Most important is having an after-action review conducted by the safety committee you create. A full after-action review and report, or AAR, should be conducted. Every incident has things go wrong. Capture those things as soon as possible while it's fresh in your memory. This is what's known as a hot wash. Get them into a report with possible recommendations on measures that can be taken for the future. Was it a human failure, training failure, process or procedure failure? Learn from the experience so you're better prepared the next time. And yes, there will be a next time. AARs must not be a blame game. Set the culture in the room as being an opportunity to learn from the incident without judging anyone who may have made the wrong decision. We're now going to have a brief discussion. Take a few minutes to discuss this section. What did you learn from this block? What were some of your takeaways? Thinking of your own church, sort of from the balcony, how well prepared are you in the area of recovery? Ask yourself, with the resources you presently have, what measures might you deploy to improve your recovery and overall preparedness? So, what's your plan in terms of resources? These are some resources that can be useful to you. Note, the incident command system is what first responders and now private entities all use in a critical incident. The links that you can see here can be very valuable and be of assistance to you, like learning about NIMS and ICS, which are the procedures first responders use in critical incidents. But there's more resources. Here's some more guidance from templates that can help you in forming your own EOP. And by the way, insurance carriers have an incentive. They want to see you prepared as well. So I've included a link from Church Mutual, but it's only one example of a resource that can be useful. Department of Homeland Security has some great stuff on its website, including some publications that focus exactly on our situation in houses of worship. So leverage those resources to the extent that they might be useful to you. Another good resource is the ELCA website. It has a number of links that can also be useful. And of course, there are a lot of private sources out there on the internet that you can leverage as well. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final message. I like to use this image, particularly with this audience, it's appropriate. When did Noah build the ark? Before the rain. It's important to know that we have every opportunity to review our risks and vulnerabilities and address those risks as best we can based upon our priorities and the resources we have available. Write an EOP that is socialized widely among your ushers, staff, pastors, and leadership, and make sure you meet with first responders to ensure their plan aligns with your plan. Have everyone on the same page and exercise that plan at least annually before it rains. I want to thank you for your attention, and hopefully you found this information useful. I'm providing my contact information should you have any questions. If it's a simple question, I'll do my best to address it by phone or email. I'm also available to assist you if needed on your assessment and assisting you in writing your EOP. Thank you, and be safe.